Hey everybody, gonna go over Spring Ecology 1.2. So your second Spring Ecology assignment. I'm gonna start on page 4 and I'm gonna jump right in. So page 4 talks about power plants and renewable versus non-renewable resources. Power plants, if you didn't know, provide all the power. Power plant creates the electricity. Um, through different ways. There are different types of power plants. And then that electricity gets sent to our homes and businesses. And this is how we can plug stuff into the wall. So obviously, because we plug a lot of things into the wall, we need a lot of electricity. And so this can create a lot of pollution depending on the type of power plant that we're talking about. And so it's important to understand it. If we're going to understand how we take resources away from our world, which is obviously the topic of this whole unit, is how humans are dealing with the environment. So I start with asking you to think about all the things in our lives that need electricity to work, right? So I bet you can come up with 50 different things that you depend on that either use electricity or electricity was used in order to build. So basically everything, like even the table that this computer is sitting on right now was made in some sort of, factory. And that needed electricity in order to work, so even if it's not something that has electricity like moving through it, even if it's something that you don't plug into the wall, something was uh, almost definitely electricity was used in order to build it. So something that I want you to think about, okay? So power plants, right here, I'm just giving you a definition, are facilities, that's buildings with special equipment, that's what a facility is. So power plants are facilities, large facilities designed by humans to create electricity so we can have electrical power that we need to run our homes and our cities and our businesses. So just like I said, we need lots of electricity to power so much. The most damaging types of power plants are the ones that use non-renewable resources. That's kind of why I put it in gray here, which is kind of a kind of a sad color. So the most damaging types are the non-renewable. We'll talk about what those are. And then the cleanest, the healthiest types of power plants are the ones that use renewable resources. And because it's healthy and clean, I put it in green. Didn't mean to rhyme, but I hope you appreciated that. So here we go. Here's your graphic, at least one of them for the page, that we got the renewable energy like water power and solar power and biomass. You can actually use plants to power some power plants. And then there's geothermal. There's energy inside the earth. And sometimes it comes up to the surface in some places. So you can make a power plant that is powered by the earth, which is really cool and very renewable. And then there's wind energy. You ever seen those big propeller wind turbines? So all of these are renewable energy, right? We keep getting energy from the sun. There's always water around and it's always moving. There's always wind and it's moving. Now sometimes it's tough to have those renewable power plants in sometimes areas don't produce as much energy because there's not as much wind or not as much water or something like that. But you can almost always have the solar, which is kind of nice. And so that's renewable. All those are renewable. They're great. They're clean. They're healthy. Here's some non-renewable. The resources that are not really clean, they produce a lot of pollution when we use them for energy. And also when we use them up, they're gone. That's why we call them non-renewable, because you cannot renew them. Once you burn them up, once you use them for energy, they're gone. All right, so that's stuff like oil and coal and gas. So oil, coal, gas, and even nuclear energy, once you use like the uranium or plutonium that you're using for your nuclear power plant, it's used up and you have some waste left over. So many non-renewable resources, the non-renewable ones that you cannot renew are called fossil fuels. Coal, oil, and gas are examples of these fossil fuels. They are non-renewable resources. And they're used by homes and power plants and burned to release their energy. So we burn the oil, where we burn the coal. We burn the coal, oil, gas, and then once we burn it, it's nice because we get some energy, we get to heat our homes, but then that's gone, and we got to keep taking more and more from the earth. So non-renewable means once we use them, they are gone and they can't be replaced. So then let's talk about the renewable resources, the most sustainable. Remember sustainable, like keeping the earth the way it is. We want that, right? We want the earth to stay beautiful. So the most sustainable, eco-friendly types of power plants use the renewable ones. So there are power plants that use solar, hydro, that means water, and wind. You know, those are great examples of renewable resources. There are whole power plants that are hydroelectric, meaning they use the power of the water, like dams, you know. So fossil fuels, when you burn fossil fuels, this is not sustainable and not eco-friendly, because once we use them, they're gone forever. But then also this pollution bit happens too. And that's kind of the last bit that I want you to know from this page. When you burn fossil fuels, it releases pollutants, it puts pollution into the air. It releases carbon dioxide, which can be a pollutant if the concentration is high enough. And then this is called sulfur dioxide, SO2. You don't need to really remember that, but that's another pollutant that gets put into the air when you burn stuff like coal. And then this can lead to other problems, and we're going to talk about those problems later on in the packet. Okay, so just know that if you burn coal, oil, and gas, they're just gone forever, and they put pollution in the air, right? Okay, so let's talk about what to highlight and what to answer. So here's your questions. Explain why humans need power plants and provide 3 examples in different types. Okay, so we need power plants because, make sure that you're answering this. And then here's some types of power plants that you can put into here. Okay, so I made a little table for you too. Number 2, it says explain the difference between renewable and non-renewable resources. So put your little definition for non-renewable here and renewable here. You can use the text to help you out. The third question, identify 3 examples of fossil fuels. So here's what you're going to highlight, right? Identify 3 examples. And then in here, you should put your 3 examples. Again, you can use the reading or go back in the video where I explained it too. Question 4, last question of the page. It says, identify at least one major problem with burning lots of fossil fuels. So what's the problem? Why, if you burn coal, oil, gas, you know what, if you use those fuels for energy, why can that be a problem? So speak to that. Page 5. So now we're going to talk specifically about global warming, the causes, why it happens, and the effects. What happens after global warming happens, you know? So this is what causes it to happen, and this is what happens because global warming is going on. So check it out. Global warming, as a definition, is the trend or pattern towards warmer temperatures climate scientists have been observing when they look at Earth's temperature data. So there are scientists that dedicate their whole life to understanding how like the weather and the climate of the Earth, so that way we can make better decisions, you know. And so that's their whole job, is that they look at data of the temperature of different areas of the Earth and the history of the Earth, and they try to tell us sort of what's going on and what could go on in the future. And so check this graph out here. This is global temperature anomaly. All right, so basically the global temperature. And so it's kind of going, here's negative 0.5 and here's positive 0.5. And so it looks like we were around sort of 0, like we didn't really change our temperature much. And then we actually decreased a little bit, but then look what happens when it gets to the year 2000, where we're starting to do more pollution because we have more factories. We call that industrialization. We have more factories around here, and then boom, it goes way up. It's going up higher than it seems like it ever has been since we started recording the history of the Earth. You know, in terms of like human temperature, the temperatures that humans have experienced. So this is a little bit of a problem, right? So let's hear what NASA says. So NASA says when global warming happened in the past 2 million years, it took 5,000 years to warm the planet 5 degrees. So it takes 5,000 years to increase the temperature of the Earth about 5 degrees. Over the next 100 years, scientists predict the Earth is going to get warmer 20 times faster. So it's not necessarily that we're making the Earth warmer. It seems like that's a normal thing. The problem is that we are making the Earth warmer way fast, really fast. And so this speed of warming the Earth could really throw off a lot of our ecosystems. So what causes our Earth to warm up? What causes global warming? I think a lot of you have heard about this in the past, so let's go over it quick. Global warming is caused by greenhouse gases. These greenhouse gases get released into the atmosphere from living cells. So you release some greenhouse gases when you breathe out. You're breathing out carbon dioxide. Not nearly as much as a factory releases, but you're still releasing carbon dioxide. That's part of what you do, and that's okay. Don't stop breathing. It's important. And then factories, obviously, like I just said, they produce greenhouse gases. Cars do, and then obviously power plants. So all of these things are causing global warming. But power plants and factories cause global warming much more than you do. So don't worry about that. What are greenhouse gases? Gases like carbon dioxide, CO2, we know that, and then CH4, which is called methane, that's a greenhouse gas too. So those are some greenhouse gases. When they get into the air, they warm up the Earth. Let's learn how. So how do greenhouse gases cause global warming? Okay, so you're going to check out the image here as I'm reading, or you can stay with me as I read the text. But the graphic really helps out. So here's the sun, right? Sunlight hits the surface like the Earth, goes down, hits the Earth, and normally it bounces and just sort of like most of it goes away back out into space, and then we keep getting more sunlight hitting us. But if you have lots of greenhouse gases like carbon dioxide, then some of the energy gets absorbed, but then some of the energy is also sort of reflected and bounces back and hits the Earth because it hits sort of like an invisible shield, right? Greenhouse gases create an invisible shield in the atmosphere. Carbon dioxide, I'm reading this picture here. Carbon dioxide and other gases in the atmosphere trap the heat, and they keep the warm air there. They keep the energy from the sun sort of in the atmosphere. And so that just warms up the Earth. So if you've got a lot of carbon dioxide, then your shield is thicker. And if you have less carbon dioxide, then your shield is thinner and the heat will just be lost. So the sunlight getting trapped for a while, this causes the energy from the sunlight to keep warming up the Earth more. And this is what happens in a greenhouse. If you've seen a greenhouse before, it's all made of glass. So lots of sunlight can get in, but not all of the sunlight bounces back out. The sunlight keeps sort of getting trapped inside of the glass. And so that keeps a greenhouse warm even in the winter. Rachel and I were thinking about getting a greenhouse and putting it in the backyard so that way we can grow plants, like plants that need warmth. You know, we can grow plants all year. So that's something that we're actually looking into. And a greenhouse stays warm because of the greenhouse effect. Those windows, they act just like the carbon dioxide invisible layer acts. It's sort of the same thing. That's why they call it the greenhouse effect. All right, so planet Earth is not used to those quick changes. I told you that. Remember, NASA thinks that the Earth will get warmer 20 times faster. And so the planet Earth is not used to these quick changes. And so scientists are unsure of exactly how global warming will affect it. So we just don't know. That's why they call it global climate change instead of global warming. Because even though we do know that the Earth is going to warm, maybe that will actually turn on some events that cause it to cool. We don't know. We're experimenting with our Earth, and we're unsure of the effects for real. So what we do know is that when things get warmer, then ocean and sea levels rise. And they rise because glaciers are melting. When you have more ice melting, then more water is put into the oceans, and that's going to cause the oceans to rise. And think about how many people live on the coastlines. Like billions of people live right near the seas and the oceans, and their homes might get taken over by the water. It's really scary. Also, storms are becoming bigger and more frequent, meaning they happen more often. That's what frequent means. They happen more often. So this is potentially really damaging too. We don't want bigger storms on our Earth, right? And right here, I give you this last bit. Maybe the scariest thing about climate change is the unknown. We are experimenting with our home, the only planet that we have to live on, and we don't know what the results of our experiment are yet. We are warming our Earth faster than it's ever been warmed before, and we don't know what's going to happen. And that should be sort of scary to you. It's scary to me. So page 5, let's get into some work here. So identify, in your own words, define the phrase global warming. I'm not sure why I said identify, so scratch that. So just define global warming right in here. Question 2, identify at least 3 sources. So highlight this, right? You got to identify 3 sources that release greenhouse gases that cause global warming. So 1, 2, 3. I probably should have given you a little data table in there, but I'm sure you can handle it. Question 3, explain how the greenhouse effect causes the Earth to get warmer. So you're going to explain right here, how do greenhouse gases cause global warming? You can use this, put it in your own words, don't copy and paste it all. You can say this in just a sentence, really. You can use this, or you can find there's tons of YouTube videos on global warming and why it happens. So you can use that to help you out too. Question 4, list the 3 effects of global warming and underline the effects that you believe will do the most damage to humans in the future. Okay, so you're going to do 2 things here. So make sure you highlight both of them. List the 3 effects of global warming. So I've given you 3 effects right here. And then you're going to underline the effect that you believe will do the most damage to humans in the future. Okay, so toss your answer there. Moving on to page 6, ozone depletion and acid rain. So we're going to talk about the ozone layer, and we're going to talk about acid rain. Okay, so what is ozone depletion? Ozone depletion is the continuous destruction of a protective, invisible layer of the atmosphere called the ozone layer. So this thing right here, here's the ozone layer, and you can't see it. It's there. This is a different layer than the carbon dioxide layer that we talked about before, that's causing the global warming stuff. This is higher up, and the ozone layer protects us from harmful parts of the sun, and we are destroying it. And this could cause some problems. So what does it do? What does the ozone layer do? It protects life on Earth from the most harmful parts of the sun's radiation, just like I said. So if you were to lay outside in the sun, underneath one of the ozone layer holes, your chances of getting skin cancer increases by 10 times. So it's really important to make sure that you are not staying out in the sun too long, that you use a suntan lotion, especially if you're underneath one of these ozone holes and you don't really know if you are. And that's pretty scary. So what are humans doing that causes this ozone depletion? Humans are creating and spraying chemicals called CFCs into the air, And these chemicals, they actually break down the ozone layer and they create those holes that we just talked about. The nice thing is that we stopped doing this. We stopped, at least America, the United States of America, like banned these things. And so since then, and they banned them maybe like 30 years ago when they realized this was a problem. And so we've started to see some of the holes come back. You know, they can repair themselves, but they need many years to do so. That's ozone depletion. You know, you put a hole in this invisible protective layer, and the sun can do more harm to you or to anything else that's laying out in the sun. You know, other animals too. So here's a tip. Many students confuse global warming and ozone depletion because they both have to do with the sun and the atmosphere, but they have very different causes and effects. So make sure that you know the difference between global warming and ozone depletion, because students confuse them a lot, okay? And then what's up with acid rain? What's acid rain? That sounds crazy. Acid rain is rain or any other form of precipitation. So you can have like snow, like acid snow, that has a low pH of about 4.0. And if something is an acid, it has its pH, which is a measurement of how acidic something is low. I know we didn't talk a lot about pH in applied this year, but you're going to have to understand it, certainly for next year. And if something is an acid, then its pH is low. And this can cause some damage, especially if it keeps raining more and more acid rain, and then the pH of like a lake or the soil can really decrease, and that can make things very acidy, and that can do a lot of harm to roads and buildings, but also to fish and plants that live in those areas. So what causes acid rain? Well, no surprise, pollution. What causes acid rain? Acid rain is caused by humans releasing pollutants like sulfur dioxide. We talked about that a little bit above. And nitrogen oxides, that X means it can be a couple different numbers, right? Just like a variable in math. So nitrogen oxides and sulfur oxides, they get into the air, and what they do is they sort of make the cloud more acidy. And burning fossil fuels in power plants and motor vehicles and cars, right? Buses, you know, that kind of stuff. These are some of the ways that we release these pollutants into the air. So if we stop burning fossil fuels and we stop, burning fuels in our cars, stop a lot of these power plants from burning fossil fuels, we can prevent a lot of acid rain, which is nice. And we're starting to do that a little bit more. So what causes acid rain? Number 3, this pollution can float for hundreds of miles before it gets trapped in the water of clouds and rains down. And so that's pretty scary too. You could have pollution, like check out the image. You have pollution over here that happens, and then the wind carries it, and so it goes down on this nice farmland area. So you could have pollution from a city that gets into the air and then floats for hundreds of miles and goes to a whole nother country and then rains down acid on that country. Pollution doesn't stay in one area. And that's kind of sad for us. You know, we could get pollution from places like New York City or other cities. And so just because the pollution is being caused in your hometown doesn't mean it can't affect you. And that's sort of what I'm saying here, right? Acid rain is an example of how pollution created in one area, like a city, can get moved by the Earth's air or water currents and harm a beautiful area that's far away from that city. So something to be mindful about. And there was just a question on the regents this last year. I think it was in January, and it was just about this. It talked about how pollutants can move around the earth. So something to keep in mind. So in your own words, I'm at the questions for page 6. We're almost done. We only got one more page. So page 6, in your own words, define the phrase ozone depletion. So give me the definition here. You're highlighting this. So number 2, why is ozone depletion potentially harmful to you or other people? So check out the reading. Why is ozone depletion potentially harmful to you and other people? Highlight that. Question 3, what is causing some rain clouds to be more acidic? So basically, what's the cause of acid rain? And then question 4, people in Canada have been complaining about acid rain damaging their forests. Some citizens are blaming factories hundreds of miles away in New York City. Based on what you know about acid rain, explain why New York City factories could be responsible. So could New York City factories be responsible for acid rain in Canada? So explain how. So that's your 4 questions. Make sure you highlight for page 6. Last page, and this is sort of a hard word to say. The E is silent, so eutroph, PH, eutrophication, eutrophication. And this is creating dead zones. So what is a dead zone? Still picture of a monkey that's all scared. I thought it was cute. Oh no. I'm messing it all up. All right. I guess it'll have to stay there. I gotta get this back up here. Sorry, I know things get a little bit crazy here, but I'm trying to give you these images the best way possible and still give you enough info. Okay, here we go. Page 7, eutrophication, creating dead zones far away. Ah. All right. Sorry, I do like that picture. So right now there are many lakes and parts of seas and oceans, and they're called dead zones. So a part of a lake, a part of a sea, a part of the ocean is called a dead zone. Why? Because there's a lot of dead stuff there. So let's talk about why these dead zones are happening. Eutrophication is the cause of these dead zones. Well, there it is. Now let's figure out what the heck eutrophication is. It happens because farmers don't understand that their fertilizer can cause large changes and damage ecosystems far away. So now again, we're talking about how something happening in one place can damage a place far away. So here's the steps of how eutrophication happens. And I colored them so that way you'd be able to see the difference between each of them. So a farmer, here's my farmer here. I made this. Let's zoom in a little bit. Let's go 160. Okay. So large amounts of fertilizer. There's nitrates and phosphates in case you wanted to know what's in fertilizer. Large amounts of fertilizer are added to farm fields. So the farmer adds lots of fertilizer. Look at that big bag of fertilizer. Rain causes too much of the fertilizer to run off the fields, and it gets into the streams and rivers before it can be used by the crops. So it rains down. Here's the next picture in your little cartoon. And rain causes some of the fertilizer to wash out of the field before it can get used by the crops. So the rain basically just carries the fertilizer away. And if you see in this next image, the fertilizer got into this stream. The fertilizer moves through the lakes and rivers, and eventually it spills into the ocean, right? And so once it's in the ocean, let's see what happens then. So algae in the water, they grow really fast. Algae are like the little plants that are sort of at the usually at the top where there's most sunlight. They're not actually plants. They're protists. They're another type of in another kingdom of life. And algae will grow really fast if there's lots of fertilizer. And that sounds like an okay thing, right? You have lots of algae. So it seems like we're actually increasing in the amount of life. So it sounds good so far. But remember, this causes a dead zone. So things die because of this. So let's keep reading to figure out how. So this creates what scientists call an algae bloom. There's lots of algae, and it looks sort of pretty from space. But the algae die super quickly because the fertilizer eventually gets used up. And then there's so much algae that a lot of them just end up dying off because they can't keep growing. And then the dead algae, the algae that have died, they get decomposed by a lot of the bacteria. Right? There's because there's dead things, there are things that feed on the dead things, and most of the time that's either fungi like mushrooms or bacteria. And there's, as far as I know, not a lot of mushrooms in the oceans, so the bacteria will feed on all the algae. And when the bacteria feed on all that dead algae, they're going to grow fast, and they're going to use up a lot of the oxygen in the water when they grow fast. And when they use up a lot of the oxygen in the water, then there's not a lot of oxygen left over. You should also know the process that they do to actually use up that oxygen, and that's called cellular respiration. We talked about that before. Cellular respiration uses up oxygen. It uses oxygen and glucose, and then it burns that up, and so that way the organism can have the energy it needs, right? ATP. So the bacteria are gonna munch on all these dead algae, do their cell respiration, but that's going to burn up and take up a lot of the oxygen that used to be in the water. So there's not enough oxygen left over, and other species like fish that are trying to survive in those waters, they die. And so if we go back here, check out our little graphic here. So farmer adds lots of fertilizer. Rain causes too much of the fertilizer to wash off. It gets into the lakes and rivers, finally into the ocean or in another body of water. In that body of water, the fertilizer works. It causes the algae, which are tiny green producers, to grow and reproduce very quickly. And this is called an algae bloom. So here's our algae bloom, but the fish are happy and alive. As the algae dies, so I turn them brown, so it shows that they die, it's decomposed by the bacteria in the water. So the bacteria in the water decompose all this algae. The cell respiration performed by all that bacteria that's eating the dead algae. The cell respiration uses up all the oxygen that was in the water. And what happens to these fish? They die. No more dissolved oxygen, so these fish die. Without oxygen to perform their own cell respiration, the cells and the body systems of animals like fish in this ecosystem begin to shut down and die, and this creates a dead zone. I know there's a lot of steps here, so you can rewind or pause, but this is something that actually happens because a lot of farmers don't realize that that they're putting too much fertilizer that doesn't get used up by their plants can harm ecosystems far away. So we need to educate people like farmers. We need to educate everybody to, sort of like consider what's going on to our planet when they create our foods. So what are we supposed to be doing here? What are some questions? One, what's a dead zone? That should be an easy one for you, right? Make sure you highlight. Two, using numbered steps, explain how eutrophication, see, it's hard for me too. Using the numbered steps, explain how eutrophication happens. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, if you will. Put it in your own words, please. And then the last question, do you believe that most farmers understand eutrophication and they just don't care? They're going to do whatever they want? Or do you believe that they're ignorant, meaning they don't know about it? They aren't educated enough. So just curious what you think. If you think farmers just don't really care about this, or if they don't even know that they could be damaging the earth when they add too much fertilizer and don't use it up. So curious what you think. So those are your 4 pages for the week. So please check them out. If you have any questions, please email or send a message on Classroom or Discord, and I'll do anything that I can to help you out. I'm signing off. This is Murphy and Spring Ecology Packet 2 of 3. See ya.